what's the big idea? What are the big ideas that I want to share that are the major specials and albums and shows that I tour with in general? And then in between, like, hey, what are the jokes that I wrote and I liked and fell through the cracks and didn't make it into the B-sides in a way, but like and sometimes people really love the B-sides more than the other ones.
Welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. On the show, it's my job to tease out the creative solutions my guests are coming up with to change the world through creativity, social action, and mindset. I also give you tips and techniques so you can do the same. This episode is brought to you by my class, Meditation for Busy People, where you'll learn how to relieve stress and discover clarity and joy in just 5 minutes a day. It's also brought to you by the Brain FM app and this podcast's host, Podbean. Also, follow the podcast on Instagram or TikTok and check out our shop for merch, music, and musings. The links are all in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Izolda Trachtenberg. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. You are going to love today's episode. We have a returning guest on the show today. Comedian Myq Kaplan joins me. Myq has appeared on The Tonight Show, Conan, Letterman, James Corden, Seth Meyers, Comedy Central, Last Comic Standing, and America's Got Talent. He has a 1-hour stand-up special on Amazon, which is called Small, Dork, and Handsome, and 2 podcasts, The Faucet and Broccoli and Ice Cream. His debut album, Vegan Mind Meld, was one of iTunes' top 10 comedy albums of the year, and his 2020 album, AKA, debuted at number 1 and was called Invigoratingly Funny by the New York Times. I am so thrilled to welcome you to the show, Myq. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved coming on the show last time. Thank you for having me back. I'm happy to return. And thank you specifically for being able to pronounce the word invigoratingly. So like first time, nailed it. I only bring that up because I remember doing a show sometime in the past couple of years, since the album came out, since the New York Times was kind enough to call it that. And so I was proud of that. And I was on a particular show where they asked me what they'd like my credits to be. And I was like, oh, I have this new album. And could you, if you don't mind, could you say that the New York Times called it invigoratingly funny? And they said, absolutely. And then they had to do, it was like for a taping. And there were so many, I think a double-digit number of takes necessary the host to get invigoratingly. I apologize to any of the crew or audience that were there that night. At a certain point, I was like, we could change it. But they're like, no, I'm gonna get it. So thank you for having me. Thank you for reading and pronouncing and everything. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be back.
That's awesome. It's like Benedict Cumberbatch, who did a huge National Geographic special about penguins and could not say the word penguin. Apparently it was just impossible. And I'm like, you're a vegan, man. You should know how to do that. But I guess I have higher standards for vegans than non-vegans. So I am so thrilled that you were able, before you take off this summer and become a nomad, I'm really grateful that you were able to take the time. And I stalk you on Instagram. I see all your posts. But when I saw, hey, we're moving and we're going to become nomads, I went, what? Let's just jump right in. Can you talk a little bit about what precipitated that? What made you go, you know what? It's time to hit the road. What's going on? Where are you going? Why are you doing it? What's the goal?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, so I've been living with my girlfriend, Rini, for just about, I think this month we've been living together for 6 years, and we met the prior year and began dating. So our relationship is almost 7 years old, and our living together relationship 6. And all of that living together has been in the building in Brooklyn that I'm in right now. We lived upstairs for a few years, and then when this apartment that I'm in now, it is the garden apartment. It has access to the garden area out back, which we moved into in 2019, just I think October, November. Then my girlfriend Rini broke her ankle in December,
Mm.
and so it became, which was, horrible. She was in great pain and couldn't move for several months, and which ended up being good pandemic practice. But
Mm-hmm.
for the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we were very grateful to have moved to this ground level apartment, so
For
that
sure.
she could not have to maneuver steps to go to doctor appointments, what have you. And so that was a particular, like, really momentous, experience in our relationship, in our lives. Like, I, as a person who generally travel for a living, I often make most of my living on the road. For those months, I, canceled a few things, postponed a few things, got used to doing that as well. I'm like, well, this is, my girlfriend needs to be able to eat, and all the other things that she needs to be able to. So this this apartment is, our home, and a meaningful home, and where we've shared, like, the bulk of our relationship has taken place in this building. And so about a month ago, we found out from our landlord, who is a nice man. He thought that he was going to have to, like, do some overhauling that he could do while we lived here, but found out, due to various codes or legal things, that he needs to replace the boiler system in our
Mm.
building, which is gas with electric. And that process will take a year, he
Wow.
estimates, and that during that year there will be no heat or hot water in the building, and so there can be no tenants living in it. So that is the main reason why we are, quote unquote, choosing to exit this home, for the law and for want of heat and hot water. So we're here through the end of May is what we are allowed to do. And so we were like, where are we going to go in May, or at the end of May, in June? Meanwhile, the B story of this tale is, we already have planned to be in the UK for a month and a half, starting in July 19th. We fly to England, and I do some shows there at festivals, and I'm warming up for the Edinburgh Fringe Fest in Scotland, where I will perform for almost every day in August. I believe the festival goes from August 2 through 28. So
Wow.
we'll arrive in Scotland, I think, at least August 1st, maybe July 31st, and leave almost a month later. And so already, I mean, our original plan was, well, I guess we have our apartment in New York. We pay rent there because that's our apartment. And then we also pay rent in Scotland because we live there for August. This offered an interesting opportunity. The idea that, oh, well, now what if we don't have a new place yet? And I already did also have planned some gigs in California in June. And I just extended the time. And we have friends with guest rooms in California, in LA and San Francisco, that are very generous and have offered to, some of the gigs I do put me up. Some gigs come with a hotel for the night or the week or whatever it is that I'm there. But as it is now, I made I had some plans, and I expanded some, and I made more. I talked to my booking agent. I was like, we're going to, what if we didn't, what if we were just living on the road, in sometimes familiar places where we have friends and family, sometimes in, like, comedy venues that I've performed at before and are familiar with. So the way it's going to work now is, on May 29th, movers will move our stuff into storage, the bulk of it, what we don't need for the next several months. And then we will, for about a week, stay with a couple friends or family in this area. Then June 8th, or June 9th, I think, June 9th to 28th, we'll be in San Francisco and surrounding areas, and Los Angeles. I'll be doing a bunch of shows there, and we'll be seeing some friends that we love. And it's not, I feel like I usually take short trips there and try to cram in. Like, the last time I was in LA, it was for 3 days, and I had,
Mm.
like, a coffee every 2 hours on one day. I'm like, friend, meet me
Wow.
here. Now I'll meet you here. Now I'll meet you here. And there's sometimes meetings to take. There's always fun shows to do and podcasts. And now we'll have over a week in LA, and sort of surrounded by a couple, other chunks in the Bay Area. And so that's really exciting. We'll return, and then from June 28th through July 6th, we'll again live with, like, my mother lives in New Jersey, and she has offered the Kaplan Airbnb
Yes.
as we wish, the room that was mine in high school. We're welcome to stay there. We have a number. We're very grateful that we have a lot of friends who have, depending, like, my mom also owns a condo in Florida. We could live in Miami if we wanted to. That's not our plan currently, but we're very grateful that we have all these generous loved ones. So for that week, we'll be somewhere, and then on July 6th, we'll drive to the DC area where I'll perform for 3 nights at the Arlington Cinema and Draft House. Then we'll drive to Minneapolis, where Rini has an aunt that we'll stay with for a few days, probably. And then I will do July 12 through 15 at one of my favorite comedy clubs in the world, the Acme Comedy Company, where I've actually recorded a few albums and just always love being. And then we'll drive back from Minneapolis to the New York area and fly to the UK, where we will live somewhere in England and then somewhere in Scotland for the duration of our time there. Then I think on August 29th, we'll fly back to the States and figure out what's next.
Wow. That's amazing. That is a lot. That's wow. Okay. So the traveling, all of that, does it take a toll, or are you one of those people who is revved up by, I get to go somewhere new?
Thank you for asking. I will say 3 specific things about that, if I can remember them. Number 1, I just want to add that I don't mean to gloss over we're going to just get our stuff into storage, because I feel like the bulk of our, there is anxiety, there is concern over, like, what is going to happen. We have, many IKEA bookshelves full of many, many books. I have already begun the culling process, and
Oh, yeah.
I've actually started at comedy shows in the past week, bringing some books that I love. And when I'm selling merchandise after the show, when I'm selling CDs and posters and download codes for my albums, I'm saying, hey, I have these books that I love that I want to offer. If anyone buys a poster or a CD, take a book. And because I am generous and moving. And so I feel like it's a beautiful confluence. My girlfriend and I were often, like, we have a friend, a good dear friend, Zach Sherwin, who is a fantastic comedian and more. He has his life's work that he's on these days is called The Crossword Show. If you can see The Crossword Show wherever you are, check it out. Zach is much more minimalist in his living than we. I think he moved recently and he could move all of his belongings in one car. He owns 0 books. He used to live right next to a library. He reads a lot, but he doesn't own books. And that is, we are impressed and inspired and not doing that. But I'm getting closer because, I have amassed so many books over the course of my entire life, some of which I've read and want to keep, and, because they are meaningful to me. Some of them are by friends of mine. Some of them are, just really impactful. And I'm like, I will want to reread this. Some of them I do reread. And then I also have masses of books that I have not read yet, even though I also get books from the library. I keep buying new books, and I don't think it would be literally possible in the lifetime of a human these days to read every book that I've ever bought and also, keep living and doing all the other things. So I'm being more honest with myself about, I do want, on an infinite timeline, on an infinite space line, if there was infinite time and space, I would keep all these books. But in this limited human incarnation, I'm being more realistic to be like, okay, this one, I've owned it for 7 years. I haven't read it yet. I'm going to put it on my Goodreads want to read list and sell it, give it away, or otherwise, remove it from the physical space of my life. And that has been very freeing and unburdening. And so I feel good about that. I feel like moving and traveling are different things, I guess, is one of the points that I'll stress to answer your question in general. So, like, zooming out, this will be part 2 of 3, which I don't even remember anymore. But I, under, quote unquote, ordinary circumstances where we have a home, I love traveling and I love returning home. It's wonderful to have a home. Like I do, zooming out even more, I've been learning a lot about Buddhism in the past few years, from Instagram and bumper stickers is the joke that I say, but for real, from a Buddhist friend and from many books and teachers. And, there is, I think the three of the main ideas in Buddhism is often like, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. And so that's very valuable. My girlfriend's been reading some books about decluttering, about like she has family who are, various places on the hoarding spectrum. And we have, and I think our whole culture, like in at least Western culture, the United States, a capitalistic, getting more things is good idea. Like we're all, subject to the influence of that in some way, perhaps, and maybe not we all. I'll speak for myself. I certainly am. We are in this household, and it feels good to think about, like in Buddhist terms, like I think of this Ani DeFranco lyric that I love. She says, my body's on loan. I got it in between my mom and some maggots. And that, thinking about that as even like my own body is not something that I'll have forever, like, which doesn't even, it's such a weird grammatical thing. Like I won't have my body. Like who has my body? And what is the thing that I think has the body? So like, if I don't even have my body forever, surely I don't need all these books. And so which are the ones that are the most meaningful? Which do I want to literally carry with me? So it's nice to have a home, which is like a construct, literally, physically, but also the construct of an idea. But so when we have that home, I love traveling, and it actually feels good because you're kind of, maybe it's like cosplaying not having as many belongings. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like when Rini and I, like sometimes we fly places and then, we limit the belongings that we have for a week or however long we're gone to what fits in our suitcases. Sometimes we like drive. We'll drive to Kansas City where Rini's family lives. And then we'll have, sort of the way that gas fills the space that it is, like, a balloon, like however big a balloon is, like the gas will expand to fit in the whole balloon, and like air will fit a whole room. I feel like our belongings will expand to fit our whole car. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like we're like, oh, we don't have to limit ourselves to just one suitcase and a carry-on. We could have, many boxes and bags. Like Rini collects fragrances. She loves having some fragrances with her, some perfumes and colognes and things. And she has a stuffed animal family that will, if we're flying, she'll bring one. If we're driving, she might bring a gaggle, a gaggle of stuffies. And so we love traveling. To answer the question, that you asked many eons ago, we like traveling does invigorate me, and returning home does relax me. Like I think I am more on the extroverted end of the spectrum, and maybe this parallel isn't 100% aligned with what we're talking about. But I love a gathering of friends. I love interacting. I love doing my comedy job. And then also, if I have friends there, if there are people, if there's a hang, I love hanging. Whereas I understand, people on the more introverted end of the spectrum might be like, I like seeing my friends, and then I like going home and being friends with just myself for a while. And Rini is, I think, at times further along that end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we do our own things sometimes, and when we do things together, like we're aware of that. But I feel like when we're traveling, like she sort of joins me in the like, well, this is what's happening. So like we're on the road, we're doing our thing. She'll take time to find for herself, like, and read or rest in the hotel room or somewhere as it may be. But yeah, I think the quote that I heard a quote recently that, like, I think I heard it on the very day that we found out we had to move, and it's by G.K. Chesterton. and which I say some people are like, that sounds like a made up name. And so, well, number one, all names are made up names. And if it was made up even more, I would make it up and say J.K. Chesterton. But G.K. Chesterton, he said, an adventure is just an inconvenience rightly considered, and an inconvenience is just an adventure wrongly considered. And so I am doing my best to contextualize and frame the move and all the traveling that we're going to be doing as an adventure, because I mean, words are what we agree that they mean they are, and I like that. I really like it. So under quote unquote ordinary circumstances where I have a home, love to leave, love to return. And here's the thing, it's sort of like a leap and the net will appear kind of thing regarding where we're going to live in the fall. It's the spring now, and we don't know. We're springing off, and we don't know where we're going to fall. But I'm confident that we'll live somewhere on Earth, probably in the Brooklyn area. I mean, the Buddhists say, next lifetime guaranteed, next breath not guaranteed. So any living that we're doing, I'm grateful for. It's a bonus. As the Jews say, dayenu, it's all, I'm very grateful for all the living and traveling and homes. I'm grateful for this home that I have had and still have right now. I have this home. I'm in this home. I'm happy for it. And I'm happy that we have a lot of, that it's a launch pad, and that there'll be a lot of like lily pads to bounce off of and figure out where we're going to be eventually. And also there is some anxiety that I am recontextualizing as excitement.
I'm taking a second to synthesize what you just said. I don't call it dead air. On radio they call it dead air. I call it anticipatory air because it's. I wanted to understand everything you said. It is interesting to me that process of contextualizing or recontextualizing, it's very personal, but also it's something that the two of you as partners, as traveling partners, sort of have to agree on, especially since one of you sounds like you're more extroverted and the other one sounds like she's more introverted. That notion of, as I've gotten older, I've kind of gone much more introverted than I used to be, except for that I think I just didn't know myself well. I think I've always been kind of introverted, but I didn't realize I was introverted, that I needed that time. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about with performing and those times when you do want to have a little bit more you time. How do you reconcile your needs in the moment as far as I have to go perform or I get to go perform? I'm doing a get to thing now. I get to go perform versus actually I need some downtime. How does that work when you're planning out your time and when you're planning out your sense of self, if you will?
Sure, thank you. Well, I'll answer in one specific way first, and then I'll zoom out. So we're recording in April of 2023, and tonight I'm actually performing the final show. I'm performing with a friend of mine that I've done about a dozen shows with this month, the comedian Shane Moss, who is a fantastic comedian and a dear friend who started out doing comedy right around when I did, about 20 years ago in Boston. And Shane is preparing for a Vegas residency where he'll be doing a show at Area 15. And it's an immersive psychedelic comedy experience with cool like visual art, being DJ'd live around him. And so I've been this month from April 2nd through 12, most of those days I was with him opening the show, and a couple others since then as well. For certainly more than half of the days this month so far. And so I've seen his show, which is called A Better Trip, and it's beautiful and wonderful. And also from April 1 through 12, we were just on the road for the most part together, Rini, me, and Shane. Some days I had my own shows and he did his own thing, but here was our tour schedule. Rini and I drove to Vermont on April 1st. Then we met Shane in Albany the next day. Then we had another show together in Vermont the next day, then New Hampshire, then Maine, then New Hampshire. Then we had Rini and I got to be just in Massachusetts for 3 days, and I had a couple shows there. Then we met up with Shane, went to Rhode Island and Connecticut, and then back to New York. And that was all in the span of, less than 2 weeks.
Yikes.
Almost a different state every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not want to do that forever. I would not I love being somewhere for more than a day. But this was the schedule, and I knew that it was what it was going to be, and it's a pleasure to see my friend who doesn't live usually anywhere near me for such an extensive amount of time, to get to share these rides where, in the ride we would talk, we would listen to podcasts, we would listen to music. Sometimes we would ride quietly. But I bring this all up in answer to your question because I remember when we had the 3 days to ourselves, Rini and me, in Massachusetts, where I was just doing my own shows, that I felt a little run down and felt and I was like, oh, am I getting sick? Is it just, my body had been going, and I was grateful to have the time to collapse,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I had an experience like that was in 2010. I had just been on Last Comic Standing and was now on tour with the top 5 of the show that season. And we were going out pretty much every weekend and doing 4 shows in different cities. And they would fly us and drive us around. And so that was nice. But I remember in October of that year, in addition to those 4, those 16 shows that they had booked for us, I had a bunch of other travels in between. And I think I only slept in my bed 3 nights that month. And on the one hand, I'm super grateful for whenever people want me to do comedy and pay me to do comedy and fly me somewhere to do comedy. I love it. And I'm so happy to do it. And, it was these times are, it's few and far between that there's such an intense tour schedule that I find myself afterwards thinking, oh, if that was it all the time, then I would need to say no thank you to a couple of those things in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the future being uncertain, with the job of a comedian as usually akin to a freelancer, we often don't know where our paycheck is going to be coming from a year from now, 6 months from now, a month from now. So saying yes to opportunities is, that was the way it started. And I'm very grateful to be able to get to a place where I'm like, oh, I don't literally have to say yes to everything that comes my way. Here's an analogy. I wonder if I shared this with you last time, because it comes up every once in a while. When I was in Edinburgh last time in 2018, which was the first time I was there, and only so far doing the Fringe, I had a friend named Adam who was there for a few days, and he's a comedian and also a painter.
Mm-hmm.
And he identifies more as a painting is his career, and comedy is like a side passion. And he told me we made plans to hike up Arthur's Seat, I think is like this little mountain that's there. I say little mountain because we definitely, I think, got to the top of it in a half hour. But it felt good. It was like, I'm not a mountain climber, but I was like, oh, we technically climbed a mountain. And we had made plans to do it around 2 p.m. on a Friday, I think. And as we were walking and this was like the most extensive conversation we'd ever had. Like, we knew each other from comedy shows, but we really got to know each other, and it was really meaningful and beautiful. And part of what he shared was that he had been invited to do a comedy show at 2 p.m. that day as well, but he said no to it because he wanted to come on this hike. He's like, if I was offered a painting gig, I would have taken it because that's my career. But since it was comedy, he's like, I already had this plan and I really wanted to hang out with you and spend this time. So that's why I said no to them. And I contextualized it as like, it seems like you're saying no, but whenever you're saying no to something or someone, you're often saying yes to something else, such as yourself. Or in this case, I call it like saying you said no to the show, but you said yes to the mountain,
Right.
And you also said, yes to, so I feel like to get back to the specific question you asked, like I'm in many ways fortunate. And one of the ways that I'm fortunate is that I I do have a lot of energy and a lot of desire to do all of the comedy shows that I want to do, that I book myself to do. It's rare for me to want to or need to cut back. Like I said, I think it's, only two times in the past decades have I ever noted, I'm like, maybe my schedule is a little more full of action than I need it to be. And like, I love like the Zen koan, like, let go or be dragged, or, don't just do something, sit there. These are, and like my girlfriend, Rini, has been like a wonderful balance to me, and has like really helped influence me in positive ways that are helpful to let me like, it started out in our relationship, it used to be as a comedian when I was starting out, you're like, I have to have shows every night or I'm not a comedian, I'm not a real comedian. I'm not a working comedian. And I'm like, okay, a night off a week. And now, the pandemic really shook all that. Like, it was like, okay, I haven't had a show in a year. Am I a comedian? Like, what am I? Who am I? Which is another kind of, identity, like that in the Buddhist paradigm. Be like, well, what am I? Do I even have a self? No. So I love getting to like the same way that I love traveling and I love returning home. I love going out to do shows and I love returning home. Or if I don't have a show, I love staying home and cooking dinner and having it with Rini and, talking or watching something or reading together. Like, I do my best to be grateful for whatever it is, whether it be something or quote unquote nothing, because even the nothings are somethings of a kind, like a mountain as compared to a comedy show. And so I feel like another thing that I think comes up is that in our lives together, I often wake up earlier than Rini, so I get a lot of, usually, quiet time until podcasts start, quiet time in the morning, like alone time, my time, almost every day, like that I'm not traveling, that I'm not, having to get up and fly or get in a car with a friend or whatever it might be. But when I have a home, and or when I'm in a place for a chunk of time, I have a morning ritual, a practice of, getting up, brushing my teeth, doing those things, and then usually meditating in bed before I get up, and then drinking a liter of water while I read something peaceful, and then doing morning pages and just starting writing before then I dive into various, email, social media, whatever I might want to do, the work of the day. And so I find that by nighttime, when it's usually time to do a show, like I'm excited. Like, I actually I like to get out of the house, if it's, especially when it's right now, it's getting beautiful and being beautiful and getting beautiful. And there's many kinds of beauty, but the warm spring beauty that we see right now, like, I live right near Prospect Park. I love when I'm home, when I'm near there, to go walk there. I love going there. I love returning. So I feel like I'm pretty lucky in that my constitution is such that, like, I don't have to do a lot of adjusting to uh, have the life the way that I want it. Though also I will share that, of course, with Rini, with another person who has, different criteria and different parameters. Like, it's valuable and important to like learn what she needs. And like, there have been times in our relationship when she was working a very demanding job, that sometimes she would come home at night and want quiet and stillness, to the point that I'd be like, well, I guess maybe it will be best we agree that I will, even if I didn't have a show that night, I will go out. I will find somewhere to be, to allow her the space and time and peace and quiet that she needs. And I'm very grateful that, and she loves me. She loves my comedy. We're both grateful for our love and these things. And also, like, I have a voice that amplifies. And so we do what we can to, she was possibly sleeping when I started doing this podcast. And now I see she has emerged from our room, and she may go back in there. She may close the door. She may put in, ear loops to keep herself in as quiet a place as possible. So it's an ongoing discussion and negotiation for each of us, individually, to hopefully know what we need that is best for ourselves, and then to communicate that verbally or non-verbally. And if there's a certain day that, even if I had a podcast scheduled and she was like, I might need to be quiet today, then I might be like, well, then maybe I'll do the podcast from somewhere, a different time or a different space. Yeah, I guess I feel like having her in my life helps me also, ask these questions and answer them for myself. What do I need? And now she is returning to the bedroom, closing the door, having smiled at me and the things that I said. But yeah, I think I'm very fortunate that I've been able to make a living, expending the energy and that is constantly, I think, churning and flowing through me. One quick fun thing. In the past year, Rini and I got these Oura rings, which are like sleep health detectors. And so it tells us, how much sleep we've got, how much deep, non-REM, REM, and, it measures our temperature and, heart rate, and it'll alert us if, like, hey, maybe you should be getting more or less or this or that. And it'll also, during the day, if I like go on a walk, it'll be like, oh, we detected a workout, a moderate workout. And I found also that when I do comedy shows and even when I do podcasts, the ring will be like, we sensed that you were doing a moderate workout. And that aligns with a thing that Rini has often said, which is that she believes that my personality burns calories. So I think that we have confirmation of that from the science of this sleep ring. And I guess that this is to say, I mean, I do like sitting down, lying down, resting, reading, but it's not, my natural inclination is to do something more than sit there, which I think is why I gravitate so much towards the don't just do something, sit there. And over the past couple of years, weed edibles have been at a sometimes at night helpful tool to encourages me to just lie down and like close my eyes and feel my body and listen to music and tell Rini like, man, I really feel my legs, and have her she would say things like, you could probably, if you just laid down regular, like during the day, not high, you might be able to feel your legs also. And I'm like, well, we'll never know.
Well, there you go. Yeah, yes. It is interesting how my personality is similar to yours in that I love to go out, I love to do things, but there's definitely a time when I'm like, okay, I need to sit for a bit. And yet sitting it's a practice for me. It's not a natural inclination. And I haven't done weed edibles for meditation, but maybe I should, because that would probably deepen my meditation practice, or at least it would give me another facet of it. But you said something that I'm curious about, and I do want to get eventually to talk about Edinburgh, and I want to get to talk about the new album and all of that. But the things that you're talking about with respect to sort of communication and negotiation with you and your partner is so interesting to me, because all of that takes a lot of self-awareness. And I'm wondering, is it the Buddhism study that you're doing, or is there some other way that you are deepening the practice of becoming more self-aware?
Thank you for asking. That is a good question. And I think the answer is both and, or all and. That it's hard to point to one thing, and because I don't think it is just one thing. But in the past decade, I have, begun, I'm 44, and I'd say I did mushrooms for the first time when I was about 25, in my mid-20s somewhere. And that was there was a real paradigm shift there, like understanding the kind of, thing that a plant medicine or a fungus medicine can offer, like to the meditative space, and my general life practices. And then I started doing ayahuasca ceremonies about a decade ago. maybe a little less. But yeah, sometime almost for the past 10 years, I've done them at least a couple times a year, and sometimes numerous more than that. Then I started meditating in a proper, sort of meditation. Like I started using meditation apps. I would say that I never really meditated before, probably also like 2015, 2016. I could look and see when I first got Headspace, the first app that I used. And that was another, like, I feel like these are all kind of like the same way that in a comedy career, sometimes when you hear about somebody who's like a breakout star, an overnight success, like, wow, where did this person come from? Well, they probably were somewhere for 20 years working very hard
Sure.
before you heard of them. And so I feel like the way that the way that I am now, which is continually like learning and growing as well, but miles ahead in various ways, in some I even hesitate to say, like, I'm so much more self-aware than I used to be, because I feel like that would be even that not necessarily the most self-aware. I'm working on it. I'm still working on it. But all of these things, like all of the ingredients that go into making an overnight success for 20 years, that the work beneath the surface, the open mics and the time at home writing for a comedian, and all of the emails sent and all of the pilots written and whatever it might be that nobody gets to see until they you make your Tonight Show debut, or have a special, or release your first album after 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it might be. I feel like similarly, all of these things, the mushrooms, the ayahuasca ceremonies, the meditation apps, which I started with Headspace, tried Insight Timer, like that a lot as well. Now I use the Waking Up app, and then also, of course, all of the Buddhist teachers and writers and books. Like I started really like reading and listening to Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron, who Rini introduced me to. I
I
had
love them
not. I
both.
was. Oh yeah, I had not been familiar, and now I believe I've certainly read every Pema Chodron book that I could get my hands on. Every once in a while, I find one that I'm like, is this one that I've read, or is it not?
Right.
And Rini's a big Goodreads advocate, so I am doing my best to codify, to categorize and keep a record for it. Then maybe I'll read it again. But so Rini introduced me to Pema Chodron. She also introduced me to A Course in Miracles. Rini introduced me to numerous spiritual teachers and texts. There is a poet named Mark Nepo, who I love, who writes these beautiful essays and just books full of meaningful life lessons. I don't know if I already mentioned, did you hear me say Byron Katie?
No, I did not.
So she introduced me to Byron Katie, and I love her so much. I'm reading right now her book, A Mind at Home with Itself, I believe it's called. And I just listened to her on Pete Holmes's podcast, and I love her. I love her work so much. It really helps. Like, it's so funny. I think, for the listener, there was a brief technical glitch that made Izolda and I not be hearing each other. And during that time, I was continuing to talk, and it was not recorded. And I was like, the most beautiful thing that I love about Byron Katie's work is that I can just pick it up, and I try to read a little bit of it every day. And even if I feel like I'm, flustered, or, kind of running emotionally amok or anything, I feel like reading even just like one passage of her writing can really center me and bring me back to presence and be in the moment where I am right here. I was like, hello? I was like, oh, I guess I'm just here alone in this moment. Great. Exactly where I've always been, and where we always each individually are. But so all of those like teachers, books, and sort of just different, I think, spiritual paradigms. It's so funny. I remember in the most recent book, I think one of the most recent books I've been reading of Byron Katie's, somebody asks her, why don't you don't use the word spirit or soul? She uses like the word mind, for example, in a place where other people might. And why don't you use spirit or soul? And Byron Katie's like, because I don't really know what those mean. I was like, that's fun and fascinating, and I dig it. It resonates. So those are things that, each of those, teachings, each of those books, each of those people they're like a world, that you could go deeper and deeper and like listen to them all on different podcasts and like read all of their books, and like each one opens up, whole new worlds, and you learn about other ones. Like I love that I've discovered the teachings of Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein and Sylvia Boorstein, and all these people who are in the space of in the Buddhist paradigm, trying to help everyone, to gain happiness and eliminate suffering. And like Ram Dass, I came across at a certain point, of course, as well. And then also, all of the wonderful comedians. I think I mentioned, I met Pete Holmes, who I listened to Byron Katie on the podcast of. Like he has numerous other, guests and people in his circles. And my father even introduced me to the I think he's a priest or some sort of a Christian figure, Richard Rohr, who we listened to on Brene Brown's podcast. Brene Brown, who I also was introduced to by Rini. So all of this happening, in the past decade, I feel like there was like, for me, a renaissance of discovery, or a naissance of discovery of all of these teachers and teachings and ideas. And so many, like, even just the simplest, like, Thich Nhat Hanh idea of like, I think it's in his book, How to Fight, maybe, or he has like all these little ones: how to eat, how to talk, how to rest, how to this, how to that. And in one of them, it was about like, that there's, I'm sure you're familiar with the often quoted as like a Native American tale of like the two wolves inside everyone.
Oh, sure.
And which one will win between the fear one and the love one, the one you feed. And I feel like in Thich Nhat Hanh's paradigm, it's about he often uses the metaphor of like watering seeds, that we all have the seeds of joy and compassion and forgiveness and love within us, as well as the seeds potentially of anger and fear and distrust and insecurity. And that, these feelings might exist within us, and then we can, tend the garden of the ones that we want to continue to grow within us. So even just that as a metaphor was, at the first time I heard it, like mind opening, mind blowing, heart blowing. And so like Rini was, an entry point for so many of these, just this very way, the desire of exploring, these paradigms, which is really, I mean, ultimately, all fingers pointing back at the self or the non-self, or like, I think Ram Dass has said like something like the best thing that I can do for anyone else is work on myself. And there's another, I forget where this comes from, but Rini shared it with me, like that the best way, perhaps to live a spiritual life is to concern yourselves with your own soul and other people's stomachs. And, so I've also in the past years been getting more into different activist circles as well, like, with regard to, political text banking or phone banking, or, going to rallies and protests and, being present in ways, contributing time, dollars, attention, and, amplifying voices in that space. And so I feel like, I forget what the exact question was, but I think it's all of these things. It's that I didn't even, I wasn't raised with, I was raised, sort of secularly Jewish, but it wasn't, and I do think that my family definitely did, highlight, I feel like, the Dalai Lama says, his real, like, I think what's the quote that I like? It's, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. And that his religion is kindness. And that resonates with me. And I think that was shared not explicitly in that language in my family as I was growing up, but that was like the thing. Like I am, these days I've been, vegan for over 20 years and vegetarian a few before that. And it's funny because when I was a kid, like I loved, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and like, violent video games. And I still like dumb action movies. I like, I can watch, I love a John Wick movie because it's kind of like a beautiful dance of, this violent cartoonish thing that I would wish didn't exist in real life, but as a kid, my mom didn't allow me to have even a fake gun of any kind. No water guns, no GI Joes with guns, no. Even I got a Nintendo, the first Nintendo, which came with the game Duck Hunt, and my mom got rid of the zapper by which you shoot things in the game Duck Hunt. So for me, the game was just Duck Watch, and it's fun. I was like, upset about it as a kid because I was like, well, I don't think that having a fake gun is going to make me, want to have a real gun. Like, I don't want to have a real gun. But my mom was just like, well, this is the rule in the house. And like now, as an adult, like I don't have kids, but I wonder how I would raise them. Like I would definitely raise them to not want to use real guns to hurt people or animals or any, and so I'm like, oh yeah, I've sort of come around to where my parents were when I was a kid. So I think the seeds were planted even at that time in my, and then probably you go back, you can keep going back, so I feel like it all started with a big bang, and eventually I was born and my parents raised me in this, kind, loving way that I'm very grateful for. And then I'm grateful to have discovered Rini, to have met Rini, to get to be alive and share in the life practice that we do and all the things that I said. But yeah, I do think that Rini has also done a lot of reading and learning about like there's a different writers about relationships, about like she has in the, I guess broadly in the self-help genre, she has read a lot and explored a lot, and sort of is like an investigative scientist of her own self and the things that are interesting to her. Like she's read about abusive relationships, and we've talked about those, and we watch like shows like Love is Blind and Married at First Sight as kind of like, ooh, what is we wouldn't make the same choices even to go on a show like that, but they often, I mean, it's entertaining and also kind of eye-opening to be like, we can look at that and be like, well, clearly there's a lot of alcohol on those shows, so that we actually stopped drinking for the most part several years ago because we found that alcohol, we're big fans of direct communication, and alcohol is something that for us in our experience obscured our capacity for that direct caring, kind, compassionate communication. And so we can see in the lives of others, we're like, oh, like what do we like about our relationship? How do we want to be? How do we want to be as individuals? How do we want to be as a couple, as a collective? And so yeah, I think we both agree. Like one thing she discovered for herself over the past few years, she did a lot of reading and learning about the autism spectrum and how often women and girls go undiagnosed or are diagnosed much later, if they're diagnosed at all, because of the different ways that that autism can manifest. And so she essentially self-diagnosed, and she's like, there is a way in which, like, I think we both, like, neither of us have an official diagnosis, but we love the show Love on the Spectrum and relate to the characters in many ways. We love, like, there are many, I've over the years written jokes about the autism spectrum that people who are on the spectrum or are friends or loved ones of, or have worked with people on the spectrum, have said, like, these are jokes that resonate and they appreciate. And so I feel like there is, they say that if you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But something that we have found in our own experience and in the experience that I've seen others talk about is sometimes communicating directly is like the best way to do things in a world or in a society where often there are things that for some people are unspoken, and when sometimes when things are unspoken and people both agree, then great, you got it, you're fine. But sometimes if things are unspoken, one person might think it means one thing and one person might think it means another thing. So I feel like that is one of the tools of our relationship, is to actively communicate directly, to the point, beyond the point where other people might be like, I get it, And so I feel like my comedy and my style and my thinking sort of lend itself to that very much. Like a joke that I say sometimes is that I say everything that I think, and Rini thinks everything that she says.
Wow.
But this is something that that is really valuable for us, because even I'll leave you with this for this topic. The very first conversation that I remember having with her, which is the very third conversation she remembers having with me, that we met twice before the real big conversation that we had that began our relationship. We were talking for hours after a comedy show and really having a very nice time and vibing, perhaps for people who use words like vibing, which I guess I am now. And it seemed really, really nice and beautiful and meaningful and flirtatious in a way that seemed clear and unspoken until I think I put my hand either on her hand or on her arm, and it seemed like that was an okay thing to do. And then I also said, I'm like, just want to make sure that like my hand is on your hand or your arm right now, and that's okay, and that you're good with that. And if you're not, then I'll take it away. And she's like, I am good with it. And that she appreciated my doing it and my saying it. And so that, like, just even from the very beginning of our relationship, that seed was planted.
And I think that kind of explicit communication where you don't leave things to chance clears up a lot of potential misconceptions and misunderstandings. To me, my husband and I, this is a thing we struggle with, if you will. And now I sound a little bit like we're on some sort of a self-help talk show, but there is something to be said for that sort of very, and explicit is the word that keeps coming to mind, very explicit communication, that you do talk things out in that way. And more power to you both. I think that's amazing that you are consciously doing that. If it's okay, though, because I could keep you here for the next 6 hours, Myq. This is so fascinating, but I know you have a day to get back to, as do I. So I would love to shift gears a little bit and go way back to something you said earlier.
Please.
And that is the Fringe Festival, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. You mentioned it a couple times that you've been there before, and then you're taking a show this August during your nomadic phase, or during part of your nomadic phase. Can you talk a little bit about what the process is to get into the Fringe Festival? Because I'm not terribly familiar with all of that. And also, what is the process for you of doing it? Because you said it's something like a show every day for a month. And then what does, and this is a non-Buddhist thing, but what will success look like for you at the end of that very arduous and intense, and yet also hopefully fantastic time?
Sure. Thank you for asking. And, it's not actually as big a gear shift as you might think, because the show that I'm bringing is actually essentially all about my relationship with Rini. So, and that she is a co-creator of, and a co-shaper and director and contributor to, as is, our relationship. And, my comedy is quote unquote mine, but also this show, more than any other, is ours.
Wonderful.
And so the process for me to bring my show there, there's different ways to bring a show there. There's the first time I went in 2018, I had told my manager that I was thinking of going, and I knew that he had, and I asked him, how do we do it? Because I knew he had clients who had gone before. And so I did some outreach and, magic managerial things to get us a producer from the UK. And that producer essentially, they knew, basically, I knew a guy who knew a guy. And that's essentially what we're doing this time as well. In fact, I wanted to go back in 2020, but the pandemic made that impossible. Then in 2021, I think they had a small version of the fest. And so I was like, okay, well, let's try to go back in 2022. But I think in 2022, they didn't have as many slots, and were filling them with people who were already planning on coming the year before, but couldn't. there were an assortment of things. So here's how you get to do the Fringe Fest in 2023 is plan to do it in 2020 and then try to do it in 2021 and 22. But so if you are a comedian, if you are, a person who has a show that you want to bring there, if you know other folks who've been there, you can talk to them, and like I could potentially put people in, be like, hey, here's the companies that I know. Here's the producers, the production organizations that I know that have brought shows there before. They could potentially, depending on when I think like probably the time to like start trying to get a show to the Fringe for like next year would be right after the Fringe ends this year, or sometime in like the end of the calendar year, heading into the calendar year of the Fringe that you want to go to. That said, also there's another much more like accessible way that I haven't done, but I know friends that have done as well. And some people find great success with this, which is just called the free Fringe. Like there's the show that I'm doing, like there's a ticket price, and the production company, they make their money, and hopefully if enough people come, then I don't lose a lot of money. But essentially it's a massive, it's a massive machine. And if you want to avoid that massive machinery, the free Fringe is, I don't know who operates it, but you could just search, free Fringe Edinburgh, and you'll find a way to just submit to that. And if you submit to that early enough, I think there's just venues all over the city, like theaters and classrooms and bars and restaurants. And there was one, like a spare room in the basement of a health food store that I saw a show in that was fantastic. And just the whole city becomes, a festival full of venues. And
wow.
So yeah, I would say, if you're thinking of bringing a show there for the first time, like definitely look into the free Fringe, because it is, you don't have to pay a producer. You'll have to pay minimal, sort of costs and fees and things, I'm sure. And you'll have to get yourself there and put yourself up and potentially, hire promotion if you want to do that, or get ready to do a lot of promotion and flyering and getting the word out yourself. But for me, I'm very grateful to have the machine.
Right.
And like I'm, hiring a UK-based PR person who has experience, getting reviewers to the show, getting, my name and face out there, and getting interviews done, or getting booked to be in magazines and on podcasts and whatever it might be, because it's like, a whole different country, a whole different experience, even though I've been there once, I'm like, I'm sure, just because if you go to one Edinburgh Fringe Fest, you've probably gone to one Edinburgh Fringe Fest. And so having gone in 2018, the thing that I hope for, essentially the plan, the thing that I loved about doing it in 2018 was I did the show, I think 25 days in a row, approximately. And the show was called All Killing Aside. And that is the hour of comedy that then became my last album, AKA, that I recorded the following spring. And doing the show that many times in that environment in front of all these different audiences full of people from all around the world was a wonderful workout for the show. Like the show was ready. I could have recorded it before I went, but it sort of made it more like lean and muscular and really, locked into place the way that it went. And it was very helpful to have Rini there and watching the show nearly every night and offering notes of like, hey, you said this one way this night and this way another night. And she's like, I prefer this for these reasons. And this doesn't actually make sense the way you say it, even though they laugh. So what if you said it like this instead or in addition? And, so we worked together, and like she offered like great notes on like physicality at certain points in the show, which is something that I don't always think about because I'm thinking about like, the words, the function. And she's big. She loves dance and movement and thinks kinesthetically often more than I do. And so she's a wonderful partner to have in that way. And so the show became, the hour, I feel like the optimal version of itself. And so that is the hope that I have for bringing this show there this year. It's in a shape that I would be thrilled to record tomorrow, but I also am still making discoveries. And so I'm happy to bring it through there and put it, give it the Edinburgh treatment, and then ultimately at some point after the festival to record it as a special and release it to the world.
It's interesting. In listening to you, I'm going, yeah. And the yeah part of it is, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I love the fact that you are comfortable with thinking, you know what, this could go up right now. And yet I can see about getting it what you called leaner and more muscular. And when that has to happen, what do you do to make sure that something you've probably practiced and rehearsed 100 times, I don't know how many times you rehearse your sets, how do you embrace and embody these changes to make sure that you're making the changes you actually wanted to make?
Thank you for asking. I mean, the wonderful thing about stand-up is that, I feel like the doing it is the thing. Like the record of it, the special, the album, the recording, like that is like, I'm thrilled to get to do that so that, people who can't get to where the show is, there's billions of people around the world, and there are, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I know that, millions, like my Spotify tracks have been listened to millions of times, which is an order greater than like I've never had 1 million people at a live show.
Sure.
Wouldn't
that be cool though?
Yeah, I can't. It's hard to even imagine. I'm sure that, some of them would have to be watching it on a screen, and there have been millions of people watching me on screens. But the beautiful thing about stand-up is that, like, I can tonight try it one way and tomorrow try it another way, and I can do that over and over. And I do that, over and over, dozens of times, hundreds of times, perhaps even thousands of times. Like, I actually don't know how many times I've done this specific show, but certainly I think hundreds. I mean, I think in a 3-digit number order, and especially having, a partner who has seen so many incarnations of it as well as myself, as well as having the various recordings going back, several years to the earlier incarnations of the show that contain some jokes that don't even end up in the ultimate version of it. But yeah, so I feel like that's a beautiful, an opportunity that I have to, like, the pandemic was a kind of a, obviously horrendous in many ways, many lives lost, many lives impacted, careers impacted, health impacted. And also the one bit of light that I have experienced from it is like that I didn't do this show for a year or more, a year and a half, I think. And I had to relearn it. And like, so I went back and listened to and watched old versions of it, and I was like, oh, right. And I had to like basically put on my own past self as a costume and be like, yes, of course, this part, that part, and remember it. Like I was, relearning a song that I knew as a kid, a song that I had written. And in so doing, like, new things arose. And then some things I'm like, oh, that part, I don't even need that part for this anymore. So that can go into a different thing, which I think will potentially segue nicely into perhaps our final topic. But I feel like that process by which I was great to know that I could relearn it, that that it wasn't starting from scratch, that and that it actually did come back stronger, that I was able to be like, well, what is this show? Because I had, all these ingredients, and now I'm like, oh yeah, this is the meal. It starts like this, it ends like this. These are the important beats that I get to along the way. This is the order that it goes. There's still a few moving parts, a little wiggle room where I'm like, maybe I don't have some things I say the exact same every time. Some things I still just get the idea across a different way each time until the point of it's being recorded. Maybe I'll record 4 different sets and pick the one that I'm like, well, that part, I guess that's how that one goes now. And ultimately, like, I or we, Rini and I, are the ultimate authority on what this show is and how it goes, because there's, we don't have to submit it to anyone. We don't have to get anybody's approval. There's no certification. There's no authority greater than ourselves regarding this show. So ultimately, it's what do we like? What do we want? What do we want it to say? How do we want it to sound and look? And so yeah, I think that's the answer.
And it's a great answer. Yeah, it's interesting. I teach people how to write, and when I write my own books, I write the book, I immediately set it aside for at least a month, and I don't think about it. And then when I come back a month later, all of a sudden I'm looking at it with the eyes of someone who wasn't the person who wrote it, and it allows me to see the whole thing a lot better. And I'm wondering if your show is like that too. But I'm not asking that question because I know time is a wasting. And I did want to ask you about, you had kind of a circuitous route to getting Live in Between albums out into the world. Would you talk about that a little bit, about what it is and the process that you went through to bring it out to us?
Sure, thank you. So here's a brief history of my life experience in comedy. I started doing comedy in about 2002, and in 2010, I released my first stand-up album called Vegan Mind Meld, which essentially was all of the best jokes all the jokes that the audience laughed at the most over the past 7-8 years. And it wasn't a one-person show. It was, there were some themes that arose, like some things that I talked about extensively, but a lot of it was just like jokes in a very specific order so that I could remember them and share them. And then a couple years later, I think 2 years later, I recorded Meet Robot, which was my second album, which was basically all the best jokes that I wrote since then that hadn't been included on the first one. And then 2014, my first 1 hour special, Small, Dork, and Handsome, came out on Netflix first, now on Amazon. And it was the first hour that it was still just a lot of jokes that I loved, like my favorite jokes, my best jokes that I'd written since the last albums. It was the first time that I sort of structured the hour in a way where there was like a time travel like element in the final joke. And so I started the show by saying, in conclusion, a joke about time travel, but first, the rest of this. And there were a few other moments throughout the show where there were kind of like, digressions and like discoveries of like returning to what had been expressed earlier, which is now something that I feel like is a constant part of my comedy experience. The thing that I love doing is to, I guess actually kind of, I'll connect this back to, I love traveling and I love returning. I love traveling physically away from my home. I love returning to my home. I love digressing far from a point and then returning to the very point after it seems like, a long, long time has gone. It's a fun, I feel like returning to a thing that the audience like might have thought was gone forever. It's like a beautiful memory surfacing. And so that special was, I think, the first time that I was playing in that space in that way. Then in 2016, I recorded an album called No Kidding, which was the first album that was themed topic-wise, not just structurally, but the theme was that I don't want children. And I had been dating a woman who wanted children, and we loved each other very much, but we found this to be an incompatibility. But because of that, it was the cause of a lot of, inner struggle and thought. And I ended up writing a lot of jokes about the topic. And I found myself thinking like, oh, what if I could make this whole show kind of springing from this topic? And so I'd never thought that I could. I never wanted to, never had the idea. Like people like Mike Birbiglia is a comedian who I love, whose first album was full of jokes, Two Drink Mike. And then after that, he's been essentially just doing beautiful one-man shows full of jokes for the last, more than probably decade or two now. And people would ask me sometimes like, do you want to do something like what he does? And I'm like, I can't even imagine doing things like he does. I'm just going to keep doing things like I do. And I'm grateful that the way that I do things has grown and evolved to at least, I'm still not doing the kind of one-man show that he is doing, but I was like, I'm glad that I conceived of an album where I talk about how I don't want to conceive of children. And I like conceiving of them. That's fine. Love children. Rini has many younger siblings. They're delightful. I love children. I don't want to specifically create any. And so that's what that album was about. In 2020, the album AKA came out. And AKA, as I said, is short for All Killing Aside. And the theme of that album was love, compassion, and not murdering. And so that was actually an idea that was born in an ayahuasca ceremony. I thought, I'm like, what if I could do an album that was all about kindness? An hour of comedy all about love in this way. And it ended up talking about ayahuasca in it a fair amount as well. And so No Kidding in 2016 and AKA in 2020. A funny thing, I realized the theme of the first one, I don't want to make any more people. And the theme of the second one, I don't want there to be any fewer people. Like no kids, no murder. In the meantime,
that evens out somehow.
Yeah, I think so. In the meantime, I still write all the jokes that I've been writing. And I'm not only writing jokes to these themes, like things happen in my life that are fun and weird, and I jot them down and I say them and I try them on stage. And so in the intervening years between 2016 and 2020, I still had lots of jokes that I had written that didn't fit either theme. And so I was like, why don't I want to record these. And so I just had the idea to record it and call it Live in Between Albums, because the idea was, I'm like, well, I have these themed albums, but I also want to share just these fun, little snowflakes of ideas that make me laugh and make audiences laugh. Yeah, I'm my own audience as well. Make me and other audiences laugh. And so in 2017, I recorded this just one show that became this album at a place called Great Scott in Boston, which sadly closed during the pandemic. My friend Rob Crean, a wonderful Boston comedian, booked me on that show many times. It happened every Friday for, I think, several years. And I would go a couple times a year and just have fun on that show. And so I recorded that album. And then in 2018, my friend Dominic Del Bene, who has a comedy record label called Blonde Medicine, and he's been a friend who I've known for a long time, and he produced AKA, Blonde Medicine produced that album. And I told him that I had this hour of comedy that I just recorded on my own that was just full of fun jokes and also happened to be clean. Like all the jokes were, family friendly, not necessarily by design, but I also was aware that satellite radio, there's a station called Laugh USA that plays clean comedy, and that because there's less clean comedy than there is all comedy, that if you have a clean comedy album or clean comedy tracks, like they might be more likely to play it more. And so Dominic helped me produce that album in a way that we're like, let's just give it to satellite radio only. Because we figured if we gave it to them exclusively, maybe that would be an incentive for them to play it even more. This is the only place that it exists. So from 2018 until now, until this past month, that was the only place that you could hear Live in Between Albums. And a lot of people, like, over the years were like, hey, I heard this track. Where can I get it? I'm like, you can get it the only place that you heard it. You just have to hear it. But one of the reasons that we released it now is that it's in the past 5 years, I found myself with more jokes that I knew what to do with that didn't fit in this new show or the last show or the one before. And so in August of 2022, I recorded Live in Between Albums 2, Rocky Mountain High, in Denver. And now that album is playing exclusively on satellite radio. And we've, like the same way that sort of on the Tonight Show, the first guest moves down to the couch and as the next guest joins the conversation. As this album is now the one that plays only on satellite radio, we're like, let's release this now, 5-year-old album, technically, to the masses who mostly haven't been able to hear it. And so that is why in March of 2023, this 2018 album has been added to Spotify and Apple Music and anywhere else that you can generally find comedy or music albums. And it's just really fun, and I love it, and I'm happy for, it's like, I don't have children, I'm not planning on having children, but these albums are my children, and I'm excited for everyone to be able to interact and engage with this child, my album, live in between albums. Oh, and just last, I don't know if it's an interlude, if it's last, but a postlude. The live in between albums 2, the one that I just recorded last year, has on it some tracks, some jokes that were originally a part of the show that I'm bringing to Edinburgh this year, that I realized I'm like, these, like, the show's already, it could go an hour and a half, but in Edinburgh it has to be under an hour. And so part of that, making it leaner is like, which jokes actually need to be here? Which jokes are actually a part of the story of this show? And like, so there's a couple tracks on this particular album, the new Live in Between albums 2. Like, one of them is called something like Dreidels, something, and Dharma. I forget. Oh, Dishes, Dreidels, and Dharma. And because I talk a lot about being Jewish in the new show, and there was a joke about dreidels, and I'm like, yeah, while I'm on the subject, but I'm like, well, there's already enough. It's more than plentiful, so that this joke can now live here. And so I feel like this is like a really fun new process that I've discovered for myself, where I can kind of, in some ways artificially, but in some ways naturally, alternate between like, what's the big idea? What are the big ideas that I want to share that are the major specials and albums and shows that I tour with in general? And then in between, like, hey, what are the jokes that I wrote and I liked and fell through the cracks and didn't make it into the B-sides in a way, but like and sometimes people really love the B-sides more than the other ones, like, because
Sure.
Comedy doesn't have to be just, one person shows or a themed concept. Like in America, a lot of the comedy is just a bunch of jokes. So if you're like, hey, why'd you start having themes? Like, well, listen to these albums. You don't have to listen to any of the themes. Like, I think you can enjoy all of the albums. But yeah, that is the story of Live in Between albums.
I love the fact that your current set of albums are Tonight Show guests. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's great. Yeah, and I'm looking forward. I actually have not listened to Live in Between albums. I have a sort of a backlog of things that I'm listening to, but I'm very excited to head to Spotify and check it out. I know you have to go. I know I have to go. Myq, I'm so grateful that you took the time to be here, and I'm glad we got to do this before you went on your huge, fun roller coaster nomadic journey this summer. I did want to ask if you wouldn't mind before we move off and the rest of our day. Can you tell me, so that, because I know people learn differently. Some people like seeing it, some people like hearing it. Somebody wants to find you. Where do they find you?
Thank you so much. That is very generous. Well, to find me, my physical person body, of course, it will be Nomadic or Nomad or Yes Glad. But my name, Myq Kaplan, is spelled in the weird way as such, MyQ Kaplan. If you go to myqkaplan.com, I usually have my tour dates there. And I also am at Myq Kaplan on most of your major social media. And so often on Instagram, people will post if I'm doing shows in New York. Like, I don't put all of my New York shows individually on my website, but they're very often, if you search for me on Instagram, you'll find what shows I'm doing about town. But another great way to find me. Oh, also, there's a new social media associated with Substack, which I don't know if you've gotten into, but I have a Substack newsletter that I also recommend people, if you want to receive one message from me a week, one email that is full of a few jokes and some thoughts, and then also my tour dates. I would love for you to check that out. That is at myqkaplan.substack.com. And Substack also has a new Twitter-like social media feed called Notes, so you can follow me there as well. I'll post jokes and thoughts and nice things and fun things and ideas there. But so yeah, Substack is a great place to find out what I'm doing. Any social media that you love. I, of course, have a bunch of comedy albums that are on all of the places that albums might be: Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, whatever major evil corporation you wish to support. You can stream, you can download. Some of them, there are physical copies. Like if you go to blondemedicine.com, you can get a physical copy of AKA if you wish, and not support any of those massive giants. Yeah, I think that my podcasts, of course, are called Broccoli and Ice Cream and The Faucet, as you mentioned. And I'd love to have you as a guest on Broccoli and Ice Cream at a future point that where I am still enough that we can make it happen.
I'd love that.
100%. That would be wonderful. But yeah, so if you're a podcast listener, then that's there. I know sometimes people, like I do post clips and short videos on social media as well. And there are some longer clips on YouTube. And my special, of course, my hour special is on Amazon. But I do think, if you're if you only do one thing, listen to my albums, or come see me do live shows. Come to Edinburgh. If you only do one thing, do 1,000 things. Have the one thing be wish for infinite wishes, and then do all of these things. But I first and foremost, as a career, as a passion, I am a stand-up comedian, and I'm very proud of all of the albums that I have created. Certainly, especially, they're all of my children. But unlike, maybe it is like with children. I don't know if this analogy will hold. But maybe parents. Do parents get to be better parents with each child?
Yes, they do.
Well, then,
I'm just going to answer that. Why not?
Check out my most recent Comedy Children, which are AKA live in between albums, and then and follow me on the writing places, Substack and social media, to get any writing joke, fun thing fixes that you'd like to get as well. And one final postlude. I did some voice acting in a podcast called Intra Quest, and I believe that whole season, the first season is maybe 10 episodes, exists all the places that your podcasts might be. And and my feel free if you're like, but I have a lot of extra money also, then support me on Patreon, and you'll gain even bonus podcasts, because for my Broccoli and Ice Cream podcast, I have 2 conversations with each guest, one focusing on the work of their life, one focusing on their joys, and I release one for free, and one is behind the Patreon paywall. So thank you for your generosity, Izolda, of spirit, of offering, of having me here. And thank you, listeners, for all your generosity of receiving the massive download of words that I just released into you. Now I have to go rest for 1 second.
Don't go, Myq. Don't go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Wow. Take a breath, though. First of all, I'll put all of the links to all of that stuff in the show notes, so you can access that there, as well as having heard Myq say it. Myq, thank you for doing that. I don't know if you remember, but I have a silly little question that I ask people at the end of every episode. And it's, as I said, it's silly, but I find that it yields some profound answers. And the question before you leave is this: if you had an airplane, environmentally friendly, of course, that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
I don't remember this question, if it's the same question you asked me last time. But
it is.
I wonder if I told you the same thing first before I got to my answer, that Kurt Brownholer, a fantastic comedian, so funny, did hire a skywriter once to write in the sky, "How do I land?" And I think that's such a funny thing. And I believe he named one of his comedy albums "How Do I Land," and the image is the cover art. But this is all to say, so I feel like that's one of the best jokes that a person could do with skywriting. I love a future show that I'm working on is about my grandmother, who died a couple years ago at age 91. And I've been loving sharing jokes about her and just the specific funny things that she said in my set. And I think here's a thing that she had. She had I forget if this was like a hanging on the wall or just like somehow adorning her condo in Florida where she lived for the last decades of her life. When you come in, one of the first things you see is a sign that says "Be nice or get out," and I think that is a thing that I would love to share in skywriting for multiple reasons. Number one, to honor and remember my grandmother. May her memory be a blessing. Number two, I think it's funny that, I think it's like a joke because, and whoever came up with it, good work, be nice or get out, because it's fun. It works on multiple levels because get out isn't a very nice thing to say, but
Totally.
if you're not being nice, then, I think it's nice to be nice to people even when they're not nice, but I do understand the idea of telling a person who's not nice to get out in a not nice way, in a way that reminds me of my grandmother, and I think is really funny. And number three, I think it would be really funny to have "be nice or get out" written in the sky, which is outside. So it's like, if people see it, they're like, where am I supposed to get out of? Get out of the out.
That means go in. Let's.
Yeah, be nice or go in. I think that works.
Oh, see, there, another truism for all of us to think about. Myq, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I appreciate very much you taking the time. And let us close before we start yet another conversation. This is Izolda Trachtenberg for the Creative Solutions Podcast. I have been speaking with the fantastic Myq Kaplan. Go find his stuff. Having seen him live, I can honestly say, go see him live too. He's hilarious. And as always, I remind you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Izolda Trachtenberg and is copyright 2023. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, keep living what you believe in.